It was supposed to be an ordinary trip. The family, gathered together for the first time in several years, decided to go camping to restore old ties and strengthen relationships. The organizers of the trip were the parents, John and Karen, who always dreamed of family harmony. Their eldest son, Michael, has just returned from several years of military service, and their youngest daughter, Lily, has graduated from university. The whole family, including Tom's cousin, was full of expectations from this trip. They chose a remote location known as one of the most secluded and picturesque places in the region, with extensive forests, a lake, and an abandoned village nearby. From the very beginning, however, something went wrong. As they were approaching their destination, their car suddenly stalled on a narrow forest road. There was only dense greenery ahead and kilometers of empty highway behind. There was no telephone connection, and they seemed to be cut off from the outside world. But John assured everyone that everything was under control. He took out the maps, slung a backpack over his shoulder, and offered to walk to an abandoned village that was marked on the map a few kilometers away. There they hoped to find shelter, or at least an opportunity to get in touch. The village was abandoned many years ago due to economic decline, but its strange reputation among the people remained. Locals said that unexplained cases of disappearances and tragedies often occurred here. They talked about missing tourists, strange noises at night, and even that they once tried to exorcise demons here, but nothing helped. Nevertheless, the family did not attach any importance to this, writing off everything as stories and legends. After several hours of hiking off-road, the family finally reached the village. Abandoned houses with collapsed roofs and half-rotted doors looked lifeless, and the smell of rot and old age emanated from them. There was a strange silence all around. The wind did not stir the leaves, and even the birds did not sing. The gloom and the cold rain that began at that moment made the situation even more gloomy. Deciding to wait out the bad weather in one of the relatively preserved houses, the family went inside. They found several old beds and discarded items that had been left by the previous owners who had fled from here many years ago. John lit a small fire to keep warm, and the whole family gathered around. Soon they began to discuss what had happened to this village. Karen read that there was an old hospital here, where unauthorized experiments were allegedly carried out. A few meters away was a former maternity hospital, and further down the road was a dilapidated church where exorcisms were once performed. It seemed that all these conversations filled the air with anxiety. Everyone felt anxious, but no one dared to voice their concerns. A sense of uncertainty was beginning to creep into consciousness. Lily suggested going for a walk around the village to dispel the oppressive mood, but her mother stopped her, saying it was better to stay together. The night was approaching, and despite attempts to make it cozy, everyone felt that something had changed in the air. Michael, being more pragmatic, took over the security of the camp. He couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching them. Although no one admitted it, it was clear to everyone that it was no longer possible to leave the village that night. The morning began with Karen waking up first. The house was dark and damp, despite the morning light coming through the broken windows. John was lying next to him, snoring softly, but something was wrong. She looked at her watch. It was already about noon, but the whole family, including Michael, who was supposed to keep order, was sleeping too soundly. Attempts to wake them up were unsuccessful at first. Karen panicked. It seemed to her that something heavy hung over each of them, like an invisible veil, not allowing them to come to their senses. When everyone finally woke up, they were disoriented and felt unusually weak. John tried to get to his feet, but he was unsteady, and Lily complained of a headache. The feeling of helplessness and strange malaise that gradually engulfed everyone was alarming. All attempts to leave the house were met with new obstacles. Michael, who was trying to go outside, suddenly felt a sharp rush of heat, after which his body weakened, and he was forced to turn back. Abandoning attempts to leave, the family tried to find an explanation for what was happening. Soon they came across an old diary lying under a layer of dust in the corner of the room. The recordings belonged to one of the former residents of the house. They described in detail the mysterious disease that began in the village several decades ago. The symptoms were similar to those experienced by the family: weakness, loss of orientation, inability to leave the place. But at the end of the diary there was a warning: never stay here for a second night. This place takes souls. Hospitals won't save you, exorcisms won't help. The realization that something terrible was happening came too late. Attempts to leave the village did not lead to results. They wandered around in a circle, returning to the same place from where they started. In desperation, Lily fell to the ground, starting to sob, and Michael screamed in frustration, but no one could figure out how to get out of this strange maze. The situation was getting worse by the hour. On the second night, when the tension reached its peak, they decided to return to the house. However, the atmosphere in it had changed. There was a strange metallic smell in the air, and the walls seemed to shrink, making the space even more cramped. Then they realized that they would not be able to leave the village. Karen began to look around, looking for at least something that could give a clue or an explanation. She opened the diary again and began to reread it, hoping that she had missed some important detail. But all she found was an increasing number of references to the inevitability of what they were already beginning to feel. The recordings told about groups of people who came to this village for various reasons. Someone accidentally stumbled upon it. Someone, like them, was looking for shelter. Each of them described similar symptoms and then mentioned a mysterious disease from which there was no escape. These people also couldn't get out, and they all ended up disappearing. Michael was sitting by the window and looking out, holding an old rusty knife found in the house. "There's something wrong here," he said, without taking his eyes off the grassy road leading into the forest. "Every time I try to get out, it feels like I'm going back to the same place. It's like someone is holding us here." Lily sat silently in the corner, hugging her knees. There was fear in her eyes, but there was something else in her gaze: apathy. She didn't cry anymore, didn't scream. She seemed resigned to what was happening. "There's no way out here," she whispered, barely moving. John came up to her, put his arm around her shoulders, and tried to calm her down. But he also felt that the situation was getting out of control. The family he was trying to bring together and rally with this campaign was now on the verge of panic and separation. He felt responsible for everyone and had to do something. Meanwhile, Karen remembered that in the diary there were references to the old hospital, which was located on the outskirts of the village. Perhaps there they will be able to find some medicines or at least information on how to escape from this place. She suggested that everyone go there, and after much hesitation, the family agreed. They went outside, trying to stay together. The weakness in the body was felt more and more, and even a simple movement began to cause severe dizziness. The road to the hospital turned out to be longer than they expected. Every step was difficult, and my legs felt like lead. There was an ominous silence all around, and it was hard to believe that life had once raged somewhere here. When they reached the dilapidated hospital building, they froze. Its windows were smashed and its doors were dilapidated. But inside, despite the desolation, they found old equipment, tools, and even beds, as in the operating rooms. The feeling that something had gone wrong here many years ago was almost tangible. They began to inspect the building, hoping to find at least something that could help them. Michael found an old safe with a lock, but it was impossible to open it without a key. Lily found a room with a file cabinet. It contained documents about patients who had once been treated here. Some of them pointed to experiments conducted on patients in order to study the effects of extreme conditions on the human body. The documents were old and battered, but they clearly hinted at something dark going on within the walls of this hospital. The further they went into the building, the stronger their sense of doom became. In one of the corridors, they came across a door leading to the basement. It gave off the same metallic smell that they had already felt in the house. "It's not worth going there," Karen said, but Michael, despite her words, stepped forward. The basement was in semi-darkness, and when they went downstairs, their eyes adjusted to the faint light. What they saw made them freeze in horror. In front of them lay an old stretcher, on which traces of rust and dried blood were visible. There were crates of equipment in the corner and chains hung on the wall. What was going on here? Lily whispered, trembling with fear. John went to one of the walls and noticed an inscription on it, scratched by someone many years ago. "We all stay here forever." Michael turned to the others. "We have to get out of here, and the sooner the better." But before they could take a step, they heard a faint thud, as if someone was slowly hitting the floor at the far end of the basement. Everyone froze. The sound was getting louder. Every knock echoed in their minds, causing their hearts to freeze in fear. John grabbed Lily's hand and quickly dragged her upstairs. Karen followed them, but Michael stopped, looking in the direction of the sound. There, in the depths of the basement, a silhouette could be seen slowly moving towards them. The family escaped from the hospital, running back to the village in a panic. But when they returned to their temporary shelter, Michael stopped, peering into space. "Something's wrong," he said. The house looked the same as before, but each of them suddenly felt a strange sense of déjà vu. "We've been here before," Lily whispered, her voice barely audible. Michael stood in the middle of the room, his gaze fixed on the front door. He was trying to make sense of what was happening. Everything looked familiar, the same old walls, the same cracked floorboards, but now they seemed alien. It was as if this place was playing with their minds, making everything repeat itself. "We've definitely been here before," Lily whispered again. Her voice was weak but full of confidence. Karen went over to her, sat down next to her, trying to calm her down, although she was on the verge of panic. "We have to get out. We're just doing something wrong," she said, convincing herself more than Lily. John was walking aimlessly around the room, looking at every corner, every piece of furniture, as if hoping to find a way out or a solution hidden somewhere in plain sight. "It's a trap. We were lured here," Michael said, his voice cutting through the silence. "I'm sure someone knows we're here, and it's no accident." "But who? Why?" Karen asked, confused. Michael didn't know the answer, but he had no doubt that what was happening to them was not an accident. He remembered the inscription in the hospital, "We're all staying here forever." These words pierced his mind like a warning. They couldn't stay here, but they couldn't leave either. Karen picked up the diary again, trying to find at least some detail that could explain their strange situation. In one of the last entries, the author mentioned a group of people who tried to leave the village, but they failed. They died one by one. "It all starts with malaise and weakness," the last victim wrote, "but then hallucinations come. You start seeing things that aren't there, you feel time and space bending, and eventually you lose yourself." "I think we're already starting to go crazy," Karen whispered, looking at her diary. Her voice was full of despair. "This diary says that they were all starting to see things that weren't there. Maybe we can't trust our own eyes anymore." John stopped in the middle of the room, glaring at his wife. "Are you saying that all this is a hallucination?" he asked. "This is reality, Karen. We are here in this village. This can't be a hallucination." Karen stood up, the diary trembling in her hands. "But what if what we see is not everything? What if something is hidden from us? We can't know for sure what's going on right now. Everything seems wrong, and I'm not sure I can trust my feelings." Lily suddenly jumped up at that moment, her face contorted with horror. They're there," she shouted, pointing to the window. Everyone turned, but there was nothing outside the window except the trees swaying gently in the wind. But Lily continued to scream, as if she was being chased by something invisible. "It's already started," Michael said gloomily, walking over to the window and looking out at the emptiness beyond. "We need to act quickly before we all lose our minds." They tried to leave the village again. This time they decided to move in the opposite direction, away from the hospital and from the house where they spent the night. Karen insisted that there must be another road, and maybe they just hadn't noticed it before. With each step, the tension grew. Their bodies weakened more and more, but they did not give up. After walking a few miles, they noticed a familiar outline. The road led them back to the same house. Michael was the first to realize what was going on. They were walking in a circle. Anxiety turned to despair when they realized that any attempt they made to leave the place ended the same way. "We're going to die here," Lily whispered, her face pale, her lips trembling. Karen, lowering her arms, felt the chill of fear creep over her more and more. Every step they took only led them deeper into a trap from which there was no way out. But she couldn't afford to give up. "There's another way," John said suddenly. "This diary. It can't be the only thing left of people. We're missing something. Perhaps there's something in the hospital or elsewhere that will help us get out." Michael shook his head but remained silent. He knew that there were almost no options left. They returned to the hospital again, this time with the intention of thoroughly searching it. Everything around them seemed unchanged, but their internal state was deteriorating. Michael was the first to step inside the building, and as soon as they entered, they felt a strange change in the air. It became cold, as if someone had turned off the heat everywhere around. They went down to the basement once more. This time they examined the walls, every corner, every object. In the far corner, Michael came across a secret door hidden behind racks of tools. The door was locked with an old lock, but they seemed to have found the key among the documents in the file cabinet. Beyond the door was a narrow tunnel leading even deeper underground. It was dark, and neither of them wanted to go first, but there was no choice. John took the lead, and the others followed him. The corridor was cold and damp, and their footsteps echoed hollowly. The further they went, the more obvious it became that this place was hidden for a reason. The tunnel led them into a small room, in the center of which was a table covered with old papers. Karen grabbed one of them and began to read aloud. "This reports experiments on people. They locked people in here, studying how long they could survive without going outside. How long can consciousness withstand a confined space?" Her voice trailed off, and she looked at the others in horror. Michael sighed, understanding. That explained a lot. "They used this village to watch us. These are not hallucinations. This is an experiment.